Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. Welcome back to school again. I've missed you all, actually. Today, we're going to undertake our first full grammar lesson. We've covered hiragana, and I hope you feel very confident about that. And we've covered katakana, and I told you that, katakana will come in time, so don't be too worried if you haven't fully mastered katakana yet. So what are we doing today? Well, this video is going to focus on the first few grammar points that will help you to start to build your own sentences in Japanese. My goal, as always, is to help you improve your Japanese abilities. These grammar points are going to prepare you to be able to read on your own in Japanese. If your goal is to master the Japanese language, or really any language, then being able to read on your own should absolutely be a fundamental goal for you. Passive learning is absolutely great, but it's eventually going to need to be supplemented with reading and practice, etc., etc. I think a lot of students started to become a little bit intimidated by the concept of grammar. If you have bad memories of your language arts classes or your grammar classes from when you were younger, then I'm really sorry. I think often grammar is taught in such a way that it's just dry, boring, painful. It shouldn't be that way. Language is amazing. Language should be fun. And grammar is the physics of language. We need grammar in order to understand the way we use a language. English grammar, assuming that you're coming from an English language background, well, English grammar is stupid. It is. It's stupid. There's a linguist named John McWhorter, and he calls English a magnificent bastard tongue. And he's not wrong. English is one of the most bastardized languages in the world. It borrows grammar from a ton of other languages, it borrows words from other languages, it makes no sense, it breaks its own rules. And if you learned English as a second language, you get this. You know what I'm saying. You know that English makes no sense. It constantly breaks all of its own rules, and generally it's, well, a bit of a mess. To be honest, Japanese can be a mess in a lot of ways too. Japanese also borrows a lot from other languages. But Japanese grammar is actually fairly uniform. So, okay, let's get into it. Let's take a look. Ikimashou. All right, so we're going to start with this new word in Japanese, and this word is bunpo. The bun part of bunpo means sentence, and then the right part, po or ho, means like a method or a principle. So bunpo in Japanese means your method of making a sentence, or grammar. And that's why I'm saying that grammar shouldn't be something that you feel intimidated by. Grammar really is just how you make a sentence. It should be easy. It should be straightforward. So let's start with the most basic sentence structure in Japanese. That sentence structure is X wa y des. This is the simplest sentence that you're likely to see in Japanese. X, or something, wa y, or something else, des. And what does that mean? Well, basically it means X is Y, or X equals Y. That sounds very mathy. I promise you that we're not doing maths. What we're really doing is being able to say that two things are the same. That one thing is a certain other thing, or one thing is a certain way. Let's break this really basic sentence structure down into very easy parts. We're going to start at the end. This is something that you should keep in mind with Japanese. In Japanese, more often than not, the most important aspect of the sentence comes at the end. Japanese is an SOV language. That's subject, object, verb. The verb always comes at the end of a Japanese sentence. Compare that to English, which is an SVO language. Subject, verb, object. In English, the verb is usually the second aspect of the sentence. I ran to the store. I bought a puppy treat. I gnawed on a bone. But in Japanese, the verb will always be last. So sometimes when I'm translating a sentence, I'll actually do it backward. I'll start at the end, I'll find the verb, and I'll figure out all of the other details after I know specifically what's being done. So that was all a really convoluted way to say that we're going to start with the verb, des. But actually, des isn't exactly a verb. More on that in a minute. Before I get into that, I hear you asking, Puppy-Sensei, why are you saying des and not desu? Well, okay, we've got two words here, and I'm sure you can read them both, right? This is des and sushi. Des, sushi. So why aren't we making the oo sound when we say des? Su is just a bit special in Japanese. You can sometimes get away with dropping the oo sound at the end of su, but only if it comes at the end of a word, and then that word kind of usually has to be a verb, and sometimes it only needs to be really specific verbs. I know that's really weird. It sounds really weird, and it sounds really difficult. But let's focus specifically on des, because it's always going to happen with des. So with des, you usually don't say desu. You can, you're allowed to, people will understand you, but it's not really necessary. I'm thinking about nouns that end in su. An example would be the word for crow in Japanese, which is karasu. I would usually use the u at the end of karasu. I think karas sounds kind of weird, but usually I'm going to say karasu. But in the case of des, I never pronounce the u at the end of the word. It sounds more like des, like an S sound, than it does desu, with an u sound. Maybe like just the tiniest little baby hint of an oo, like des. Like just like the little itty bittiest, tiniest bit of an oo. But other than that, des is des. There are some really firm rules for su and when you can kind of drop that oo sound and when you can't. But for now, let's just remember that in the case of des, there's no oo sound. I know. We just spent all that time learning hiragana and now I'm breaking more rules. I'm sorry. But here is our first grammar point. Su becomes just an S sound in the case of des. So, okay, well, what is des? Technically, des is a copula. It functions similarly to the concept of a verb, and it similarly conjugates like a verb in Japanese. And as I've said before, in Japanese, the verb is always going to come at the end. So even though technically des isn't a verb because it's a copula, we're going to treat it as if it were a verb. And basically, des means to be. So it's used very much in the same way that we use the word is in English. Okay, so we have our basic sentence. It's x, y, des. And now we understand that des basically means is or to be. So this sentence is going to mean x is y. Okay, well then what about this little tiny wa part? we're going to hone in on this little hiragana and we're going to discuss the role that it's playing in this sentence. First, I hope you remember that it's pronounced wa and not ha. Do you remember that I said ha can be pronounced either ha or wa, but it will always be wa when it's being used as a particle? Let's contrast that to the hiragana wa, which is always wa, and generally it's not used as a particle. So, okay, ha can be pronounced ha in a ton of different cases, usually nouns. One example is hashi. Hashi means bridge when it's written like the kanji to the left, or it can mean chopsticks when it's written like the kanji on the right. Both cases will be hashi, and it's always going to be pronounced ha-shi, like that ha sound, okay? But if wa is being used as a particle, then it'll always be pronounced and written as wa. There are complicated reasons for this, but the important thing to remember for now is that absolutely, when you make a sentence like x, wa, y, des, it's always written and pronounced wa, just like that. Like in the sentence, XS wa koinu desu. XS is a puppy. All right, so what actually is this wa? What does it mean? How do you use it? That is, believe it or not, a very difficult question to answer. Wa doesn't have a direct translation into English. So let me do my best to try to explain what it means. Wa is a particle. In Japanese, a particle is joshi. Joshi kind of translates to a helping word. There are various joshi in Japanese, and they all perform a grammatical function. In the case of wa, the best translation that I've ever found for this tiny little word is that it means something like as for something. It's used to mark the subject of the sentence. Imagine a sentence like, XS is a puppy. In English, we know that XS is the subject of the sentence because the verb immediately follows XS. But Japanese doesn't quite work like that. So you need to use wa to mark exactly what the subject of your sentence is. This is the grammar point that I'm getting at. When we write a sentence with wa as the topic marker or subject marker, then it will always be pronounced wa, not ha, and it marks the subject of the sentence. So technically it's marking the topic of the sentence, but we'll talk more about that in the future because there's actually another marker that also marks the subject of the sentence, but they use kind of different nuance to get the point across. I know, that's complicated, and it's unnecessary. Wa, on the other hand, is small but mighty. It's going to appear in probably the majority of Japanese sentences. So we have this x, wa, y, des sentence structure. What can we use it for? First, we can use x, wa, y, des to kind of connect two nouns. We can say, noun is a noun. For example, we might say, inu wa dobutsu desu. Inu is a noun meaning dog. Dobutsu is a noun meaning animal. So, in this sentence, it's like dogs are animals. Or the dog is an animal. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Manager Sama. So, Japanese doesn't really use plurals. In English, we really want to distinguish the count of a noun when we use it. Am I sending out a letter or am I sending out letters? Did I steal one taco off the edge of the counter or was it more than one tacos? Japanese doesn't really care about that. You kind of simply have to infer the number of things being discussed. So in a sentence like inu wa doubutsu desu, the meaning is either one dog is an animal or more than one dogs are animals. Or, of course, all dogs are animals. Just to be clear, Japanese does have very specific ways that you can kind of distinguish the number of something. You can absolutely say two specific dogs or three dogs are animals. But for a basic sentence, noun count is just not necessary. Well, essentially, you have to remember that English is a content language and Japanese is a context language. English requires you to be specific about exactly what you're talking about because all of the information is basically coming from the content that you say. But Japanese is a language that prefers to convey information through context instead. So sometimes you're required to stretch your mind a little bit and determine what exactly is being said based on what exactly isn't being said. We'll talk more about context in the future, but for now, just be aware that Japanese is a context language and that it isn't as precise about exactly, specifically what is needed in terms of content. So, we can now use the x, y, des structure to make noun equals noun sentences. Well, what else can we do with it? Well, we can make noun is adjective sentences. And these are, in my humble puppy opinion, way more useful. Let's look at an example. これは大切です. This is a noun is adjective sentence because you're using adjective in the y spot to describe the noun in the x spot. これ means this. It's a noun, and that obviously stands in for whatever you might be gesturing to, or whatever you might be referring to, or whatever you might be thinking about. And taisetsu means important or valuable in some way. So, obviously, this sentence means something like, as for whatever this is, it's important. Or, more clearly, this is important. And it is. Like, this is actually a really important concept. Okay, let's look at another noun is noun sentence. You, my dear students, you would each say, Watashi wa gakusei desu. Watashi is one of a handful of ways that you say I in Japanese. And gakusei means student. So, Watashi wa gakusei desu means I am a student. And this is also a really common and really useful construction in Japanese. Watashi wa something desu. You can use it to talk about your profession. Watashi wa honyakusha desu. I'm a translator. Or you could use it for things like your age, your year in school, your nationality, etc., etc. So actually, I think that watashi is such an important kanji that I want you to know it. This isn't a kanji lesson. Stay tuned. Like and subscribe. Kanji lessons are coming soon. But we'll treat this as a tiny itty bitty kanji mini preview. Okay? Let me quickly show you how you would write watashi. It looks like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 strokes. It would be written just like that. Okay? Maybe one more time, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right? So that would be how you would write watashi. Yeah? Not too difficult, but I think it's important. So, as I said, technically, watashi is just one of the ways that you can say I in Japanese. And actually, it's somewhat female leaning because there are different ways to say I that might sound more or less gendered. So sometimes some of them are more feminine, some of them are more masculine. But in Japanese classes, we're generally taught that watashi is the most naturally non-gendered way to say I in Japanese. It's not. It totally sounds just slightly girly these days, at least in my opinion. All right, well, okay, let's move on with more grammar. One more little thing that I want to add to our x, y, des sentence structure. We're going to use the same grammar pattern, and now we're going to add one more little particle, or joshi, to the end of the sentence. This little guy is ka. So our new sentence pattern would be x, y, des, ka. Ka is another joshi, another particle. And in this case, it's used to create questions. Ka isn't the only way to make questions in Japanese, but the best way to think about ka is to consider it to be basically the same as a question mark, the way we use it in English. In Japanese, it'll be at the end of a sentence, and it turns your sentence into a question. You never have to rearrange the constituent parts of a sentence in Japanese in order to turn them into a question the way we have to do in English. Adding ka to the end of a statement is simply enough to create a question. In English, if I have a statement, I am a puppy, in order to make that into a question, I would need to rephrase that as, am I a puppy? The word order really matters in English because you're going from I am something to am I something? And I also need to change the inflection of the last word to make it interrogative. No need to do that in Japanese. I am a puppy. Watashi wa koinu desu. Am I a puppy? Watashi wa koinu desu ka? You don't have to change your inflection. You don't have to change the word order. Oh, I, okay. Let's make an x, y desu ka question, okay? This question is, Nihongo wa muzukashii desu ka? Nihongo means the Japanese language, and muzukashii means difficult. So this question is asking, is Japanese difficult? Obviously, you mean something like, is Japanese difficult to learn? Or is Japanese difficult to speak? Or is Japanese difficult to read? But again, context in Japanese is really important. So you kind of have to sort of infer what someone means when they say this sentence. But usually, Nihongo wa muzukashii desu ka? Is Japanese difficult? They probably mean something like to learn. One more example. This is another noun wa noun desu ka sentence. Kore wa chou desu ka? Kore means this, as we said before, and chou means butterfly. So our sentence is this a butterfly? Hopefully you now have a pretty good basis for how x, y sentences work. This is the foundation on which a ton of Japanese sentences are going to be built. So having a great comprehension of how this construction works will benefit you a whole lot as you start to build more and more complex sentences in Japanese. All right, let's do a really quick quiz, okay? Let's start out by giving you an English sentence, and I'll ask you to try to say it in Japanese. So our sentence is, this is sushi. We learned the word today for this, and of course sushi is just going to be sushi in Japanese. So how would you use an x, y sentence structure to say this is sushi in Japanese? Kore wa sushi desu. This is sushi. X, y desu. It's pretty easy, right? It's not too hard. Let's do another one. What about this sentence? We actually saw one exactly like this today. Do you remember how to say, is Japanese difficult? Remember, when you're forming a question, you don't need to move anything around in the sentence. you're just going to add ka to the end of your x, wa, y, des sentence. So, to turn Japanese is difficult, Nihongo wa muzukashii desu into a question, all we're doing is we're just adding ka, and we get Nihongo wa muzukashii desu ka. Many things about Japanese really are difficult. Making questions, though, not difficult at all. In fact, it's kantan. It's simple. All right, let's now do one in reverse. I'll give you the Japanese sentence, and then you try to translate it into English. Should be very easy. What does Puppy-Sensei wa kawaii desu ka mean? Hint, if you don't already know, kawaii means cute. So in English, what would this sentence be? It means, is Puppy-Sensei cute? Hopefully you said yes. I hope. Please. All right, last sentence. Kore wa nan desu ka? Nan, in this case, means what? Just like nani, what. But in this case, it's nan. We'll talk about why in the future. But kore wa nan desu ka? What does it mean? It means, what is this? It means, what is this? Right? Okay, so really quick, we just kind of breeze through these quick grammar quizzes because it's just kind of, it's an easy point and hopefully you understood it. Anyway, I really hope that you found this first grammar lesson helpful. I'm trying out some new stuff and I'm trying to get some ideas of what is working and what isn't working. And as always, please let me know what your thoughts are. I genuinely care about how you're doing and whether or not you're enjoying these lessons and how effective they are and whether or not you're learning. Do you feel like you're learning a lot or is my pace too slow? I never want anyone to feel overwhelmed, but at the same time, I don't want you to feel kind of bored. Hopefully you're not bored. I really want to make this as fun as possible. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Next lesson will be quite different. We're going to be doing some greetings, or aisatsu in Japanese. I'm looking forward to seeing you all then. For now, lead with love. I've been Excess. See you later. Mata ne.